the creator of the award-winning comedy Veep, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus. The writer and director of films In the Loop and The Death of Stalin, Armando Iannucci's best known for his biting wit and keen sense for satire. He's now taken on the cinematic adaptation of his favourite author's most personal story, David Copperfield, played by Slumdog Millionaire actor Dev Patel.
Form a queue.
Into my life's journey.
We're ruined.
Like a castle.
Bailiffs.
How can we be ruined?
Like a big castle.
Heads.
We could keep him as a little pet. It was a joke, I'm sorry. I've been attempting to learn gentleman's humour from a book.
Armando Iannucci, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Your film, The Personal History of David Copperfield, is an adaptation of a Charles Dickens novel. And sometimes when we speak about Dickensian Britain, it seems like it's a million miles away from modern life. But what do you think this story has to say to us today?
Well, with that phrase Dickensian, yes, it conjures up something that I don't think actually is Dickens. It conjures up a foggy, muddy, mucky, in the past, squalid. And yet this book is full of, it struck me as being very modern. On a sort of intimate basis, it's about very modern personalities. It's about people growing up and not worrying whether they're fitting in and whether they've made the right friends, whether they've fallen in love with the right person, what people make of them and who are they, and all that kind of anxiety, status anxiety that people carry with them. But also it looks at homelessness and debt and poverty, and how poverty and wealth exist side by side, which again, unfortunately, is a very modern thing. And also the comedy of it.
This is a donkey free zone.
You're a remarkable woman. Very kind.
We've tried to keep as many of Dickens' sort of one-liners and gags in the screenplay of the film as possible. He's a very modern, experimental writer, really. Now, having said that, I don't expect people to know anything about Dickens or know anything about the book. The film is there on its own terms. It's an entertainment. I wanted, although it's set in 1840, I wanted people to feel that they were watching something happening now.
This narrative is far more than mere fiction.
Are you David Copperfield?
I am indeed.
It is the true story of the life I was about to lead.
Your mama is ill.
How is she?
Very ill.
Dangerously ill.
She's dead.
We're very sorry.
I can easily recall people of strong character.
Good morning.
Actors do something funny when they put bonnets on and costumes on. They kind of start behaving a little bit differently like that. And I said, no, just be yourselves, talk like yourself, move like yourself. It's the present day for you. You're not in the past. And I wanted the cast to reflect sort of Britain today, really. It's a sort of, I'm trying to celebrate, it's so easy to, especially in the current climate, to talk about Britain as isolationist, but actually Britain, I've always found a very diverse and welcoming and creative and funny environment, really.
Now, in terms of your cast, we do see more diversity, like you mentioned, different faces than we're used to seeing in period pieces and historical films, I think. Can you explain a little bit more about that decision and what it reflects?
Well, it wasn't a huge. It just felt instinctively right. It just, because I could only think of Dev as David Copperfield. I didn't have anyone else in my head who could play the part, really, who could play that range of vulnerability and steeliness and strength and physical comedy and visual, all of that throughout the film.
Huge maniac!
What an adventure we have had.
On your head.
What are you doing?
Medicine. Reviving you.
This is salad dressing.
Is it?
I said yes because, who wouldn't? What an amazing opportunity. Armando, just the chance to kind of be on his team was amazing. And I just found his vision for the story was so relevant, and it would, I never knew anything about the book, David Copperfield. I thought it was a magician. And I was like, okay, here's an opportunity to tell this story and make it relevant to so many people, so a young kid like me from where I grew up from can relate to it and won't miss it in the next generation,
We see David's talent for writing, but he's also a social chameleon. He takes on other people's voices quite easily, and that's a bit like what an actor does. With all the different characters you play, do you ever lose track of your own identity?
Yeah, actually, that's the truth of it. You know, you spend, you know, you're in these kind of tiny little secluded bubbles doing these movies where you're kind of cut off from reality. You know, you wake up, you're wearing, you know, this costume, you're inhibiting another character, and, you know, it can play with your brain a lot. I have an amazing, very small group of friends and loved ones that act as my earth wire. They ground me. And they're very understanding that I sometimes go off and disappear and do this thing selfishly, which is acting. And it kind of is hard to switch off. It's a way of life. You have to almost exist it. You can't just, it's not a 9-to-5 type thing. So I put it down to them more than me.
Your career has been very rich and varied in recent years. We've seen you in some very different projects, recently in the thriller The Wedding Guest, some very dark themes there. Hotel Mumbai talks about terrorism. I should imagine this is pretty far from the quiet part of London that you grew up in. How do you go about taking on that challenge of exploring these different mindsets, these different worlds?
It just is being really interested by it, you know. I grew up in Rayners Lane in northwest London, and you know, I hadn't really travelled much. You know, going to central London for me was really exciting. You know, look now, and like I get to travel the world and, you know, live these different lives. You know, these different incarnations is really, it's a joy. It really is, and it makes you just kind of. Just live a richer life and understand more about what it's like to be a human, how to exist, I guess.
Mr. Copperfield, it would be of material assistance to me if you would join those gentlemen, echo their slanderous cries, and then enunciate the following. Here, round the back, is flitting.
Here, round the back.
Here.
Here.
Here, as in the oral organ. Here.
Here, round the back.
Mm-hmm.
He's flitting.
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 Precisely, splendid. For no time like the present.
Open up! Come on! Pay up! The money, please. Go back! Here, round the back. He's...
What?
Flitting.
Flitting, is he? Go back!
David Copperfield gets an education at Salem House, where he meets a lot of privileged young men in the great tradition of British boarding schools. The Labour Party announced that they would abolish private education were they in government. How do you think that would affect society, and are people in the UK ready for that?
I think it will take a while, because you forget how ingrained that is. And it's not just a thing about privilege. It's also, Britain is a very centralised country. I mean, everything is based, you know, we're finding out that a lot of power resides in the office of Prime Minister, and a British Prime Minister with a majority can do anything. Over the last 20 years, Prime Ministers have absorbed power away from the different ministries and absorbed power away from the different local government in the different regions. So actually, Whitehall in London is the be-all and end-all of everything that happens across the UK. I mean, local government resources have been cut by 60% in the last 10 years. So there's that, and I'm just much more concerned about that than getting into kind of like a class war kind of argument, really. Although that will have an effect. The closing of independent schools will have a beneficial, but I think that will just take longer to feed through. Whereas more immediately, you could be making a big difference by spreading the wealth across the country.
And your previous series, a satirical show that went behind the scenes of the British government, The Thick of It, reflects perhaps a gentler time in UK politics. Well, how would The Thick of It be now with Brexit?
I can't imagine, because the thing in The Thick of It was about people not wanting to be found out if they'd made a mistake, but they weren't criminals. They didn't break the law. Whereas now we have politicians talking about how they might break the law, or how if a law applies but they don't like it, they'll just somehow get round it. We're seeing that happen in America as well with impeachment and once you've reached that stage, then literally you have anarchists running the country. You have people who do not respect the idea of there being law, and yet they're in charge of the law. That's once you've reached that point, you've reached a kind of tipping point, to use the environmental kind of view, where it's impossible to imagine how you can get back from that, really. It's almost like now is a sort of parody of the thick of it in terms of they've taken the storylines but then decided to kind of muck about with them. And people don't care anymore. That's the problem. I think politicians don't really... nothing feels real anymore. I don't quite believe that Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister. I don't quite believe it.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was your name?
Copperfield.
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 This is Crotwood Trosserfield.
David Copperfield.